They say every scar tells a story. But what about the kind you can't see? What about the weight a woman carries when the world keeps calling her too much? In the summer of 1884, under a sky that forgot how to rain, a woman named Mattie Cole was sold on an auction block like cattle, mocked, humiliated, and left to believe her size was a sin. But somewhere in that crowd stood one man who didn't laugh, a quiet cowboy named Caleb Mercer, who saw not muscle or burden, but soul. From the dust of the auction yard to the fires of betrayal, from broken barns to quiet dawns, their story became something larger than survival, a story about dignity, forgiveness, and what it means to be enough in a world that tried to make you smaller. So tell me what happens when the woman they called too big learns to stand taller than them all, if you believe strength can come wrapped in gentleness. Like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Echoes, and let's ride together into They mocked her for being too big, until the cowboy lifted her and said, "You're perfect to me." The summer sun burned over Dry Creek Junction, turning the sky into a pale sheet of fire, the kind of heat that made even the flies too tired to buzz for long. Dust swirled through the main street, curling around boot heels and wagon wheels, settling into every wrinkle and pore. At the far end of town, where the boards of the old stage cracked and sagged, a crowd had gathered, men with whiskered faces, women hiding under bonnets, children clutching their mothers' skirts, curious and afraid. It wasn't a festival, it wasn't a show, it was an auction, and everyone knew what kind. A woman stood on the platform, wrists loosely bound in front of her. No struggle, no tears, just silence. The silence of someone who had already learned how useless it was to beg. Her name was Mattie Cole to those who had ever dared to know her. 25 years old, taller than most men in town, shoulders broad, skin browned by sun and work, hands like she'd been born gripping a rope. She looked like the land itself, tough, unyielding, and made for more than the pity in their eyes. Someone in the crowd whistled. Look at her size, bet she can pull a plow all by herself. Laughter scattered through the crowd like dry leaves caught in wind. Mattie didn't blink, didn't lower her head. Instead, she turned her gaze beyond them, toward the red mesas rising against the horizon. If I can see the hills, she thought, then I ain't trapped yet. The auctioneer, a squat, sweating man named Cliff Morton, wiped his forehead with a rag. His voice carried the shrill tone of greed. Now, folks, what we got here is a fine piece of labor, strong as a bull, eats like one too, more laughter. He slapped the post beside her leg. Look at that muscle. Why, she could haul timber till sundown without complaining. Mattie's jaw clenched, but she stayed still. Her uncle, Harvey Cole, stood a few feet away, hat in hand, pretending to be a stranger. The man who'd raised her after her parents died, the same man who'd just sold her to clear his gambling debts. He couldn't meet her eyes, didn't try to. Morton turned toward him. Harvey, you vouch for her work. Harvey nodded once, dry-throated. She'll do what's told. A quiet murmur went through the crowd. It was one thing to sell cattle, another to sell kin. Mattie could feel the heat rising up her neck, not from the sun, from the shame. But she wouldn't give them the pleasure of seeing it break her. Her mother once said, "You don't choose how folks see you, girl. You choose how you stand, while they do." Morton clapped his hands. We'll start the bid at 2 sacks of beans and a barrel of cornmeal. Come on now. Who'll start us off? A few snickers. A cough, Then a voice from the back, "I'll give the beans. She can work my north field." Till she drops, the crowd roared. Jed Coulter, mean as a snake and twice as cold, grinned through yellow teeth. Even the town preacher looked away. Mattie lifted her chin a little higher. Her wrists burned under the rope, not from tightness, but from the insult of being tied at all. A fly landed on her cheek. She didn't brush it away. Morton laughed with the crowd. 2 sacks and a barrel, come on. Folks, she's worth more than that strong back, healthy, no husband to fuss over. He winked. Someone spat. Someone else muttered, "Ain't no man wants that mountain in his house." A thin thread of anger flickered inside her. She swallowed it down, her breath slow. That's how you survived, by saving the fire for when it mattered. The bidding stumbled forward, half-hearted offers, more jokes than money. Every word chipped away another layer of her dignity, until only stubborn pride was left standing. And then a new voice cut through the noise, low, steady. "You're offering her too cheap." The laughter stopped, as if the desert itself had gone silent. Heads turned. From the edge of the crowd, a tall man stepped forward. Dust clung to his boots. His hat shadowed his face. He moved with the calm of someone who didn't care what anyone thought. Morton squinted. "And who might you be?" The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied the scene, the rope, the faces, the shame, and something shifted behind his eyes. "Finally," he said, "name's Caleb Mercer. I'm here for work, not spectacle." Morton barked out a laugh. "Then you're in the wrong place. Friend, this here's business." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "No. This is a debt paid with dignity, and you're undercharging both." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Morton's smile faltered. "You got something to say. Say it plain." "All right," Caleb said quietly. "Untie her. I'll cover whatever she owes." The air thickened. Morton frowned. "You don't even know her." "Why? Because she deserves to walk off that stage on her own 2 feet." He tossed a small pouch onto the podium. The sound of coins striking wood echoed sharper than any gunshot. Harvey stammered, "Mister, you don't need to." Caleb turned to him, his voice calm but dangerous. "She's your kin, isn't she? That makes it worse." For a long, heavy moment, no one breathed. Then Morton sighed, grabbed a knife, and cut the rope. The fibers snapped. Mattie flexed her hands, feeling the burn fade from her wrists. She met Caleb's eyes. They were gray, like storm clouds that hadn't decided whether to break or not. He said, "I've got a ranch west of here. Broken Mesa. I could use help someone who doesn't quit when things get hard. You'll get fair wages, food, a roof, and the right to walk away anytime you choose." Mattie's voice, dry from dust and disbelief, rasped out. "Why me?" Caleb's answer came soft, but it cut through the silence. "Because I've seen men half your size crumble under half your weight, and because you don't look like the kind that needs saving just a chance." The wind shifted. For the first time all day, Mattie let herself breathe. She nodded once. "I'll work. But I don't owe you." Caleb almost smiled. "Good. I don't hire debt." He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was rough, warm, steady like earth after rain. As she stepped down from the platform, the boards creaked not from fear, but from the weight of everything she'd just reclaimed. Someone whispered, "Too big for her own good." Caleb turned, his voice rolling through the heat. "She's exactly the size this world needs right now." No one dared to laugh. The wagon wheels creaked, the horses snorted, and as Dry Creek Junction faded behind them, swallowed by dust and sunlight, Mattie didn't look back once. She just stared west toward the red mesas and thought, maybe that's where I begin again. The crowd didn't know what to do with silence. It pressed down heavier than the heat itself, that sudden hush after a single voice had dared to sound human. All eyes turned toward the stranger who'd spoken. He stood there, boots dusted white from the trail, hat shading most of his face, but even in the shadows, his gaze was steady. The kind of gaze that made men stop talking before they realized why. Caleb Mercer. That's what he'd called himself. No one in Dry Creek knew the name, but they could tell he wasn't one of them. His coat was worn but clean, his belt buckle dull from use, not show. His hands, those told the story best scarred in a way that said he'd done his share of losing and still showed up for work anyway. He stepped closer to the stage. The crowd parted without knowing it had. Cliff Morton, the auctioneer, tried to gather back his courage. "Now look here, mister," he stammered. "This ain't your affair. This woman's up for labor contract, fair and square." Caleb tilted his head, his voice calm as dry thunder. Fair and square, he looked at the ropes around Mattie's wrists. "That what you call this?" A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. A few men muttered. One laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. Caleb didn't move, but his presence made the laughter die quick. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch, the sound of metal clinking carried in the heat. "I'll give you this," he said. 10 times what any man here has offered." Morton's mouth fell open. You don't even know her." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't need to. I know what it costs to watch a person's dignity sold off a piece at a time." He dropped the pouch on the podium with a dull thud. "That should cover her debt. Maybe teach you what respect feels like." The auctioneer glanced at Harvey Cole, Mattie's uncle, who was sweating through his shirt. "Harvey, this your kin?" Harvey's voice cracked. "She was... ain't my problem now." Caleb turned toward him slowly. "That's your blood," he said quietly. "You might have lost your money. But seems to me you lost something worth more." The man had no answer. He just looked away. Caleb turned back to Morton. "Untie her." The crowd shifted again, uncomfortable. Someone muttered. "Who does he think he is?" Another whispered. "Maybe he's sweet on her kind." Caleb ignored them all. The auctioneer hesitated only a moment before pulling a pocket knife from his belt and cutting the rope. The strands fell to the floor. Mattie's hands came free, pale marks circling her wrists like ghosts of old chains. Caleb spoke, low enough for her to hear, but clear enough for everyone else. "You walk if you wish, you ride if you choose. You're no one's burden." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. No pity, no heroics, just fact, stated plain, like the truth had been waiting too long to be spoken. The crowd murmured again. This time the sound wasn't laughter. It was confusion, the uneasy kind, that comes when someone breaks the unspoken rule that cruelty is safer than kindness. Mattie looked at him, her expression unreadable. The rope was gone, but the years it represented weren't. She'd seen men like this before. Kind eyes, steady hands, promises made in gentle tones, only to twist later into orders and debts unpaid. Her thoughts tangled like wire. What if this is another trick? Another man pretending decency until the door closes behind me? Caleb seemed to sense her doubt. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd her. He just stood, waiting. Finally, she found her voice. "What happens if I say no?" Caleb's answer came soft but certain. "Then you walk away. and I'll make sure no one follows. Mattie blinked. She wasn't used to choices. The word walk stuck in her chest like a stone. The wind shifted, lifting strands of her hair across her face. She took a long breath. Then another. At last, she said, I'll work for wages. Nothing more. Caleb's mouth curved just enough to suggest a smile, though it never reached his eyes. That's all I ever wanted. He stepped up onto the platform and reached for the last piece of rope that still hung from the post. The blade of his pocket knife slid through it with a single motion. He tossed it aside, then extended a hand. Mattie didn't move. Not at first. She looked at his hand, rough skin, calloused knuckles, no gold ring, just a hand, waiting. The air felt too thick to breathe. The people below them watched, waiting for something for her to refuse, or him to falter. Instead, she reached out and took it. The contact was brief, but the silence that followed felt endless. It wasn't the touch of a man claiming a prize. It was the steady clasp of two people who knew what it meant to carry too much and still stand upright. Caleb helped her down, careful, not lifting her, just steadying her steps. When her boots hit the dirt, the world seemed to shift slightly, the way it does when something small and irreversible happens. He looked at her once more. You ready to go? She studied him, searching for the lie. She couldn't find one. Finally. She nodded. I'll need my things. Caleb nodded back. We'll get 'em. Wagon's just down the road. They started walking. Side by side, the crowd parted again. But no one spoke. A few watched with something like shame flickering in their eyes. Others just spat into the dust, trying to forget the feeling of witnessing decency. As they passed, a man called out, Ain't she too much woman for one ranch? Caleb stopped, turned his head slightly. His voice stayed calm, but there was iron underneath. Not for mine. They kept walking. The sound of their boots, hers, slow. His steady faded against the hum of wind and cicadas. At the edge of town, a wagon waited. 2 tired horses pawed at the dirt, restless under the heat. Caleb climbed up first, checking the reins. He looked down at her. Like I said, he murmured, ride, if you choose. Mattie hesitated. She'd walked most of her life away from safety, away from kindness, away from everything that might have hurt, less if she'd stayed. For once. She decided not to walk. She climbed up beside him. The seat creaked. The horses shifted. The wagon rolled forward. As Dry Creek Junction slipped behind them, in the shimmering distance, Mattie glanced sideways. Caleb's face was unreadable, worn, quiet, but honest. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence between them was different from the one on the auction block. That had been the silence of shame. This one felt like possibility. And though she didn't smile, her shoulders eased for the first time in years. Somewhere ahead, past the red hills and the dry wind, there was land enough to start over. And for now, that was enough. The wagon rolled west, its wheels creaking over dry gravel, the sound echoing through the emptiness. Each turn of the axle seemed to count time slower than the sun itself. The road stretched like a faded ribbon between the mesas, red stone cliffs against a pale, endless sky. No trees, no shade, just the whisper of wind chasing its own tail. For a long time, they didn't speak. Caleb held the reins loose, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Beside him, Mattie Cole sat straight-backed, her hat pulled low, her hands gripping her knees as though the motion might fling her from the seat if she dared to rest. The silence wasn't heavy, not yet. It was something else. A test Maybe. The kind of quiet that waits to see who will break it first. The horse's hooves made a rhythm, 4 beats and a pause. 4 beats and a pause steady as a heartbeat. Hours passed. The air smelled of dust and sage. The heat shimmered around them, bending light like glass over fire. Caleb reached behind the bench, pulled out a tin wrapped in cloth, and unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay 2 biscuits, a slice of jerky, and an apple that had seen better days. He took a small bite of jerky, then offered the rest toward her. "Go on," he said quietly. "Ain't much, but it's food." Mattie shook her head. "I'm fine." He didn't push. "You sure long road yet?" "I said I'm fine." He nodded, folded the tin back up, and tucked it beside him. No irritation, no lecture, just quiet acceptance. Mattie kept her eyes on the horizon, jaw tight. Her pride sat between them like a third passenger. She wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with a price, and she wasn't sure which scared her, more hunger or trust. After another mile, Caleb broke the silence again. "Used to ride this trail with my boy," he said, almost to himself, back when the air didn't feel so empty. Mattie glanced at him, unsure if he expected her to answer. He didn't. He kept talking, his tone slow, the way people speak when memory hurts more than silence. Name was Daniel, 7 years old, smart as a whip. He'd count every rabbit hole and pretend the rocks were castles. He smiled faintly, said he'd build me a real one someday, made of cedar and sky. Mattie's fingers relaxed a little. "Where's he now?" Caleb's eyes stayed on the road, buried on a hill north of the ranch. Fever took him, his ma too. The wind changed direction, carried the words away, like dust over water. Mattie stared down at her hands. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "Me too." "Then, softer, I tell you that, so you'll know why I don't ask questions about where you've been. Folks carry enough ghosts without being made to unpack 'em." Mattie looked at him again. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He was telling her the truth, the kind that doesn't demand anything back. The wagon bumped over a rut. She shifted, winced slightly, and reached for the tin. "I'll take that biscuit," she said quietly. He handed it over without a word. She ate in silence, slow and deliberate, eyes on the road. After a while, she asked, "Why'd you buy that ranch of yours?" Caleb gave a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Didn't buy it. My father left it to me. Been holding on ever since, though it's more bone than blood now. Wind took the roof off the barn last spring. The well runs shallow come August, but it's land, still mine." Mattie nodded. "Still yours," she repeated softly, as if testing the taste of those words. Caleb studied her profile, the way the sunlight caught the edge of her cheekbone, the faint tremor in her jaw every time she swallowed. He didn't stare, didn't let his gaze linger where others would. He just looked at her like a man reading weather signs, respectful, careful, knowing there's always more under the surface than what you see. He said, "You ever had land of your own?" Mattie shook her head. "Worked plenty. Never owned." She paused, then added, "But I've thought about it. What it might be like to stand on something and call it mine, without owing anyone for it." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's a good thought to keep." The sky began to shift toward gold. Long shadows stretched across the trail. In the distance, the mesas darkened like sleeping giants. They rode on, the quiet settling deeper, softer now, like a blanket instead of a wall. After a while, Caleb said, "You know, I used to think home was where you had walls around you. Now I figure it's where you stop counting the miles you've run. Mattie turned her head slightly, watching him from under the brim of her hat. He wasn't smiling, but his words carried something close to peace. She thought about her uncle, about the laughter, about the ropes, and she thought about the way this man hadn't once looked at her, the way others had not, like she was too much, not like she was less. He speaks to me as if I'm made of soul, not muscle, she thought. The wheels clattered over the last stretch of gravel road before the dirt turned smoother. Ahead, through the heat haze, something began to take shape, a low wooden house with a leaning porch, a windmill creaking beside it, a half-collapsed barn crouched under the slope of a hill. Caleb nodded toward it. Broken Mesa Ranch, he said simply. Ain't much to look at, but it stands when the wind hits. Mattie watched as the horses slowed, the wagon easing to a stop in front of the gate. The sky above the ranch glowed with the dying light copper and rose and fading gold. It was a tired kind of beauty, the kind that still holds on even after everything else has fallen apart. Caleb hopped down first, then offered his hand again. This time, she didn't hesitate. He helped her down, steady and quiet. The ground felt solid under her boots, not like the stage, not like the crowd. This was earth, real, honest. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the house, the barn, the lonely stretch of open land beyond. Then she said softly, "Doesn't look broken to me." Caleb's eyes softened. "That's because you're looking with new eyes." She didn't answer, but somewhere, deep inside, a small part of her, the part that still believed in mornings, began to stir. As the sun dropped behind the mesas, a coyote called out in the distance, and the ranch settled into the sound of evening. Mattie looked up at the first star pricking through the sky and whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what beginning feels like." The last mile to the ranch felt longer than the rest of the journey combined. The wagon creaked and sighed as if tired of the trail, and the horses slowed without needing a word. When they finally passed through the split-rail gate, a wooden sign swung in the wind, its paint almost gone, the words barely legible, "Broken Mesa Ranch." The place looked like it had lived through more storms than years. The fences sagged under their own weight. The barn leaned toward the west, as if bowing to time itself. And the porch, Lord, the porch groaned with every gust, an empty chair, rocking gently as though someone had just stood up from it and never came back. Mattie sat on the wagon bench, eyes scanning the spread. It wasn't much to look at, but she'd seen worse places, where the land gave up on people before they could give up on it. Caleb climbed down, stretching his back with a quiet grunt. "Well," he said, voice steady, "she ain't pretty, but she stands." Mattie followed him, her boots sinking into dry dust. The smell of sun-baked wood, old hay, and iron filled the air. He untied the horses, led them toward the small corral. "They'll rest easy here. You can, too." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the porch. On that chair still rocking. "Who used to sit there?" she asked. Caleb paused at the fence. "My wife, Anna, used to hum while she mended shirts. That chair never stopped moving, even when she was still." Mattie looked down, a flicker of respect in her silence. He dusted his hands and motioned toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you your room." Inside, the air was cooler. Dim light filtered through curtains, bleached thin by the sun. Every board creaked underfoot, but it was a friendly sound, like the place was waking to company after a long sleep. Caleb led her to a narrow hallway. "Second door on the right." He opened it and stepped aside. "This one's yours," he said. Mattie hesitated in the doorway. The room was small but whole. A simple bed with a quilt, folded neatly at the end, a washstand with a chipped basin, a single window facing east, where dawn would pour in first, and beside the latch, a lock. On the inside, Caleb nodded toward it. "She's old, but she holds. Figure everyone deserves the choice to sleep easy." For the first time since she could remember, Mattie felt the knot in her chest loosen, a lock that worked both ways that was something rare in her life. She stepped inside, brushing her fingers over the wooden frame. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Caleb lingered at the door. "There's water in the pump out back. I'll fix supper. You can rest if you like." Then, quietly, "I don't expect thanks. Just honesty." He left before she could answer. She stood alone in the little room, taking it in piece by piece. The quilt was hand-stitched, the kind women made on winter nights when stories filled the air. The dresser drawers still held ghosts of someone else's life, a ribbon. Frayed and faded, a child's wooden horse, one wheel missing, a shawl, worn thin where hands had held it tight. Mattie folded the shawl carefully and set it on the bed. She wasn't the type to pray, but she found herself whispering a quiet thank you to whoever had left this softness behind. Then she went to work. The basin got scrubbed, the floor swept clean of cobwebs and dust. By the time the sun began to drop behind the mesas, her room smelled of soap and open air. She caught sight of herself in the mirror above the washstand. The face staring back was harder than she remembered, eyes sharp, jaw set. But behind the dirt and lines of weariness, there was something else, a flicker of a woman, not yet beaten down by the world. Outside, coyotes began their song's long, lonely notes weaving through the twilight. Mattie sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The sound should have made her uneasy, but it didn't. It felt like company, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. For the first time in years, she felt something she could almost call peace. A knock came at the door. Caleb's voice, low and even. "Food's ready." She washed her hands and stepped into the hallway. The smell met her halfway, bacon and beans, cooked slow, the simple mercy of a warm meal. The table in the main room was small, 2 chairs opposite each other. Caleb had set 2 tin plates, 2 mugs, nothing fancy. A lantern flickered between them, throwing soft gold over the walls. He gestured to a chair. "Hope you don't mind breakfast for supper. Habit I never broke." Mattie sat. "It's fine." They ate in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like a tired hand. Caleb finally spoke, quiet. "Used to be 3 at this table. Now it's just me. Didn't think I'd hear another fork scrape a plate in this house again." Mattie's throat tightened, but she didn't look up. Instead, she said softly, "Well, you do now." He nodded, accepting the words as the gift they were. Neither of them spoke after that. When the plates were empty, she rose and carried them to the basin. He watched her for a moment, then said, "You don't owe me chores tonight." "I know," she replied, rinsing the tin, "but it feels right." He smiled faintly. "Then it is. Later." When the lanterns were out and the coyotes had gone quiet, Mattie lay in her bed with the window cracked open. A soft breeze slipped through, carrying the scent of sage and night earth. She listened to the boards creak, to the windmill turning somewhere out back, to her own breathing, finally finding its rhythm again. Her hand drifted to the lock on the door. She turned it once click. The sound was small, but it felt mighty. A lock, a bed, a roof that didn't leak. and a man downstairs who hadn't asked for anything she didn't choose to give. For a woman like her, that was more freedom than the open desert. She smiled into the dark, a quiet, private smile no one would ever see, the kind that meant for now, I am safe. Morning came soft and golden, spilling through the east window before the rooster even thought to crow. Mattie was already awake. She'd slept deeper than she had in years, but rest didn't come easy to someone who'd learned survival through motion. So when the first light touched the curtains, she swung her legs out of bed, washed her face in the cool basin water, and stepped outside. The world was quiet, except for the creak of the windmill and the sleepy snort of horses in the corral. The air was crisp, smelled of sage, dust, and beginning. Caleb was already there, a hammer in one hand, a post in the other, his shadow long across the field. He looked up when he heard her boots on the porch steps. "Mornin'," he said simply. "Mornin'," she replied, pulling her hair back under her hat. No one spoke about breakfast, or plans, or gratitude. They just started working the way some people pray quietly, steadily, without asking for anything in return. By mid-morning, the sound of hammering echoed across broken mesa. They worked the north fence first boards, warped by sun, nails rusted to powder. Mattie hauled new rails from the wagon, balancing one on each shoulder. Caleb meant to tell her to take one at a time, but the sight stopped him. The wood looked heavy, heavy enough to bow most men. She carried it like it was nothing but part of her. He let out a low whistle. "Remind me not to arm wrestle you." Mattie smirked without looking up. "I wouldn't waste your time." He laughed a real laugh, quick and bright, cutting through the morning air like the sound of a creek breaking free of winter. She didn't laugh often, but that one pulled it out of him. For the rest of the day, they moved together like they'd done this for years, her lifting, him measuring, both working in quiet rhythm. When one stopped, the other kept pace. When one spoke, it was always practical. "Pass me that nail. Hold the post steady. Watch your thumb." But beneath the work, something else was taking shape, something wordless and steady. By noon, the sun pressed down heavy. Sweat ran along Mattie's neck. Darkening the collar of her shirt, Caleb called a break, tossing her a canteen. She took a long drink, water dripping down her chin. He watched her for a moment, not the way other men had watched her, but with a kind of quiet awe. "You ever stop?" he asked. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "Stopping, don't build fences." He chuckled softly, sitting on a post. "No, but resting keeps the hands from breaking." Mattie tilted her head, half smiling. That sound like experience, talkin' experience and a few busted knuckles. She looked at his hands, scarred, rough, honest, then at hers larger, stronger, but just as worn. No one ever thanked me for being strong before, she thought. Strength had always been her curse, not her gift. Men mocked it, women whispered about it. But here, under the New Mexico sun, her strength had purpose. It fixed fences, hauled feed, lifted a ranch from its knees. And for the first time, she saw respect in a man's eyes instead of amusement or fear. The afternoon stretched wide. They mended what could be saved, burned what couldn't. When Caleb fetched tools from the shed, he returned with something unexpected, a saw handle. Sanded down to fit her hand, he offered it wordlessly. She took it, surprised. You fixed this," he nodded. "You fixed. Figured you'd work better if it fit right." Mattie tested the grip. It settled perfectly in her palm. She looked up at him, and for a heartbeat, Neither moved. "Thank you," she said finally. Caleb shrugged. Just good sense. But his eyes told another truth, one he didn't know how to speak yet. Later that week, they turned to the barn. The place had leaned so long it seemed afraid to stand straight. Mattie climbed the ladder to the roof, hammer in hand, while Caleb steadied it below. "You sure you're comfortable up there?" he called. "Better up here than in a crowd," she said. He grinned at that, shaking his head. When a loose board slipped and clattered to the ground, she muttered, "It's just the wind. Not me." "Didn't say a word," he answered, though the corner of his mouth twitched. They worked until the shadows stretched long again. The barn stood truer, now, not perfect, but proud, the way things look when they've been cared for, not rebuilt. When they finally stepped back, Mattie rested her hands on her hips, breathing hard. Caleb followed her gaze across the property, fences mended, the corral strong, the barn holding its weight again. "Place is startin' to look alive?" he said. Mattie nodded slowly. "Looks like it's rememberin' how to breathe." That night, she stood by the porch railing, while the last light faded over the hills. The wind was soft, the sky turning deep violet, streaked with fire. Down by the barn, the horses shifted in the corral, their shadows long and calm. Caleb joined her quietly, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one over. "Tomorrow we'll fix the gate," he said. She took a sip, eyes still on the horizon. "Tomorrow," she echoed. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It carried a rhythm like the creak of saddle leather, or the heartbeat of land that had learned to trust human hands again. She turned the cup in her palms, thinking how strange it was to find peace in sweat and blisters. Maybe that was the trick of living, to keep mending what could be mended, one nail, one breath at a time. Behind them, the empty porch chair rocked in the wind, but it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like memory still moving, still alive. Mattie looked across the ranch, now touched by moonlight, and felt something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Not happiness exactly, but something stronger, the quiet knowing that her effort mattered, that her hands, her sweat, her will had given this broken place another heartbeat. And standing there, with dust on her boots and the scent of cedar in the air, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I was never too much. Maybe the world was just too small." The wind changed that morning. Not much, just enough for the air to feel restless, for the dust to move against its usual grain. Mattie noticed it first. She stood by the corral, pitchfork in hand, hay dust clinging to her sleeves. The horses twitched their ears, uneasy. Caleb came out from the barn, wiping sweat from his brow. "You feel that?" she asked. He looked up at the sky, cloudless, but strange. "Feels like a storm without rain." And sure enough, by mid-afternoon, the storm arrived. Not from the heavens, but from the road. 3 riders approached, raising a trail of dust that glowed red under the sun. The man at the front sat tall, his coat black, his boots polished to mirrors, the kind of man who wore wealth like armor and cruelty like perfume. Elias Whitlock, owner of most of the valley land, cattle, and men alike. He reined in at the fence and smiled the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. Didn't expect to see Mercer still breathing after all these years. Caleb stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Afternoon, Whitlock. The name carried weight-old history, bad blood. Whitlock leaned in his saddle. "Afternoon. Hardly feels civil. You've been forgettin' your obligations." Mercer? Back taxes? Water rights? You're drawn from my creek again. Caleb's jaw tightened. The creek's fed by the mesa. Always has been. It don't belong to you. Whitlock chuckled. Everything in this valley belongs to me one way or another. His gaze slid past Caleb to Mattie, standing behind him, hand still on the pitchfork. He gave a low whistle. Well now, what's this? Didn't know you were hiring draft animals. Mercer. Laughter cracked from the two men behind him. Ugly. Sharp. Mattie didn't move at first. The words hit like a slap, but her face stayed calm. Unreadable. Then she stepped forward, boots crunching gravel. She stopped a few paces from Whitlock's horse, looking up at him with the steady calm of someone who's seen worse than his kind. Funny, she said, her voice even, quiet. You talk about animals, but you're the only one here who's dressed like a vulture. The laughter died instantly. Whitlock's hand twitched on the reins. Careful, a girl. Careful, she echoed. Seems to me, careful's what keeps you fat, while other folks starve. Caleb stepped closer. Tone firm. Mattie. But she didn't step back. Her eyes stayed on Whitlock's, unblinking. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Even the horses stilled. Whitlock smirked, trying to shake off the tension. Strong one, ain't she? You always had a taste for broken things. Mercer. Don't worry. You'll lose her soon enough, same as you lost everything else. Caleb's hand curled into a fist, then loosened again. His patience was hanging by a thread, but he didn't bite. Whitlock turned his horse. You've got a week to make things right. After that, I come back with papers, or with men. Either way, this place will be mine. He tipped his hat mockingly toward Mattie. And maybe I'll find some use for that mouth of yours. She didn't flinch, but her grip on the pitchfork whitened her knuckles. Caleb's voice came out steady, though his face had gone pale with fury. You step foot on this land again without cause. I'll treat it like trespass. Whitlock smiled. You do that, but you might want to look east at sunrise. Mercer. You'll see where your water runs and who's taken it. He yanked the reins, and the three men rode off, laughter echoing behind them until the sound was swallowed by the wind. When they were gone, Mattie still hadn't moved. The sun burned her neck, but she didn't feel it. Caleb exhaled slow, shoulders tense. I told you not to talk to him that way. She turned, eyes blazing. And what way should I talk? Then bow my head. Pretend I'm grateful he only spit words instead of bullets. That man's dangerous. Caleb said. He's got men, money, the sheriff in his pocket. I've seen men like him my whole life. She snapped. They get meaner every time someone stays quiet. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury too long contained. Caleb looked at her a long time. I ain't saying he's right. I'm saying we can't afford to fight him on his ground. She shook her head. Maybe that's why he thinks it's all his ground. The silence after that stretched wide as the desert. He turned away first, walking toward the barn. She stayed, staring at the horizon where Whitlock's dust still lingered in the air. That night, the ranch was quiet, too quiet. The wind had gone still, and even the coyotes seemed to sense something waiting just beyond the dark. Mattie sat on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, fists tight against her jaw. The stars were out, scattered silver on black velvet. She could hear Caleb inside, moving slow, shutting windows, checking lamps. Her heart was still pounding from the afternoon. Every word Whitlock had said replayed in her mind like a curse. Didn't know you were hiring draft animals. The insult dug deep, Not because it was new, but because it was old. It was the same song she'd heard her whole life, just in different keys, and she was tired of it. Her voice came out low, almost to herself. All my life, I've been told to keep my head down. The wind picked up then, whispering through the dry grass, as if the land itself was listening. She looked out toward the dark ridge, where Whitlock had vanished, and said softly, "Maybe that's why men like him never stop." The words hung there, fierce, fragile, and true. Behind her, the door creaked open. Caleb's shadow filled the porch light. "You should sleep," he said gently. Mattie didn't turn. "Sleep won't change what's comin'," he sighed. "No, but you'll need your strength when it does." She finally looked up at him, her face calm again, but her eyes alive with something new, something unbroken. "I've spent my life being strong, Caleb. Maybe it's time I start using it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then we'll face whatever storm comes." The door closed behind him. Mattie stayed where she was, the stars cold and bright above her, the desert humming softly below. And though she didn't move, something in her shifted quiet, steady, like thunder gathering just beyond the horizon. It started with silence, the kind of silence that didn't belong in the desert. No trickle, no hum of moving water, just stillness dry and wrong. Mattie noticed it first. She'd gone to the creek at dawn, bucket in hand, breath still fogging in the cool air. But when she reached the bend where the current usually shimmered, the bed was bare, the earth cracked, and the air hung heavy with dust instead of life. "Caleb," she called. He came running from the barn, half-dressed, boots unlaced. When he saw it, he froze. The creek, the heart of Broken Mesa, had stopped. Mattie knelt, touched the cracked mud. Her fingers came away dry. They did it. Caleb's jaw clenched. "Whitlock." They followed the bed upstream until they reached the dam, or what was left of it. The wooden boards had been split clean. The trench Whitlock's men had dug to redirect water south still glistened faintly in the sun. Mattie's breath burned in her chest. He took it. Every drop. Caleb kicked at a broken plank. "He warned me. I should have gone to the sheriff." Mattie stood, dust swirling around her boots. "The sheriff's bought. You know it." He turned, frustration sharp in his voice. "Then what do you suggest we do? March over there with what, a hammer and pride? Maybe that's enough." Mattie. "No," she said, stepping closer. "You keep talking about avoiding trouble, but trouble don't care if you avoid it. It just keeps coming till you stand up to it." Caleb stared at her, torn between admiration and fear. "If we start something, he'll finish it his way." She took a breath, steady but fierce. "Then I'll finish mine." By the time the sun rose full, she was already saddled up. Caleb came out onto the porch, eyes narrowing. "Where you headed, Whitlock's camp. Mattie, I ain't asking permission." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You don't even know what you'll say." She swung up onto the saddle. "Don't have to. I just know I'm done letting men like him talk for me." And before he could argue again, she nudged her horse and rode off into the morning light, the sound of hooves cutting through the dry air like a heartbeat. Whitlock's men were already by the south trench when she arrived. 3 of them, rough-looking, guns slung lazy across their backs. The one in charge, a lean man with a scar along his jaw, grinned when he saw her. "Well, look what the wind blew in. Mercer send you to beg for water." Mattie dismounted, boots hitting the dirt hard. "Begging ain't what I came for." The man smirked. "Then you came for nothing." "This land's Whitlock's by deed." She glanced at the trickling water rerouted through the trench. "Ain't by right," he shrugged. "Same thing out here." Mattie stepped closer. "Is it 'Cause I figure if right and wrong mean the same as rich and poor, then maybe you boys forgot what kind of men you used to be." His smirk faltered for a heartbeat. "You talk real brave for someone standin' alone. I've stood alone my whole life," she said, voice steady. "That's why I ain't scared of it anymore." He spat into the dirt. "You're wastin' your time." She pointed at the trench. "You think this makes Whitlock a man stealin' water from folks who already got less than him?" "Careful," he warned. "You're talkin' about your betters." Mattie's eyes flashed. "Then maybe my betters ought to start actin' like it." The man's hand dropped toward his belt, not quite the gun, but close enough to make the air tighten. Mattie didn't move. "You pull that iron," she said softly, "and you'll prove every word I just said." For a moment, no one breathed. The wind stirred the dust between them. Then another voice broke the silence, calm, low, familiar. "She's right." Caleb Mercer stepped from the ridge, his rifle slung over one shoulder, his face unreadable. He walked forward, slow, deliberate, until he stood beside her. "Morning, boys," he said. "Didn't figure you'd be working this early." The foreman's eyes narrowed. "Mercer, this ain't your land anymore." Caleb's tone stayed cool. "Funny, I don't remember selling it." Whitlock's man took a step closer. "You think standing here with her makes you a hero, no?" Caleb said, "But it makes me right." The man's lip curled. "You think you can stop us," Caleb shrugged. "Ain't about stoppin'. It's about witnesses. You touch that water again. Every rancher in this valley's gonna know who dried it up. And when they're thirsty, they won't come to me." The foreman hesitated. The other men shifted, uneasy. Mattie spoke again, voice steady as stone. "You tell Whitlock something for me. Tell him I ain't afraid of his name. Tell him some of us don't measure worth in acres." Her tone was quiet, but it carried, cutting through the hot morning air like the first crack of thunder before a storm. The foreman's hand twitched once more, then dropped from his belt. He spat again, this time without conviction. "This ain't over." Caleb nodded. "Never is." They turned their horses and rode off, muttering. The sound of hooves faded into the heat. Mattie stood watching until the last rider disappeared behind the ridge. Caleb exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't have come alone." She looked at him, half smiling. "I didn't." He met her eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see the woman he'd hired. He saw the equal who'd stood between him and ruin. They turned together toward the creek. The water, slow but steady, began trickling back through the broken dam. Not much, but enough. Caleb knelt, letting the cool flow wash over his hands. "It'll run again." Mattie crouched beside him, watching the ripples. "Then so will we," she said. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth, faint but real. For a moment, the world seemed to breathe again. Later, as they rode back toward the ranch, the silence between them was different, not empty, but full. Full of what had been said without words. Full of the knowledge that some fights aren't about winning. They're about refusing to bow. The sky above Broken Mesa darkened slightly, clouds forming over the horizon. Mattie looked toward them and said, "You think he'll come back?" Caleb nodded. "A man like Whitlock always does." She gripped the reins tighter. "Good. Maybe next time, he'll find the creek runs stronger than he thought." Caleb smiled, slow and tired. "You got a storm in you, Mattie." She looked ahead, eyes sharp under the brim of her hat. Maybe it's time this valley learned how to weather one. The horses pressed on, their shadows long against the rising wind. 2 riders heading home, leaving footprints and dust soon to be washed clean by rain. It began with the smell. Not smoke exactly, not yet. Just that faint, sharp tang of something wrong. Mattie woke before the flames, before the crackling, before the horses started to scream. She sat up fast, heart pounding. Caleb. No answer, just the creak of wind through the shutters. Then she saw it, a flicker of orange light against the far window. Her boots hit the floor before she even thought. By the time she threw open the door, the night was already a live fire, licking up the side of the barn, devouring dry wood and hay like it had been waiting for the chance. The sky above glowed the color of blood. Caleb burst out behind her, pulling on his coat with one arm, a bucket in the other. Get the horses. She didn't hesitate. Barefoot, she ran straight into the smoke, the heat slamming against her like a living thing. Inside, the air burned her throat raw. The animal's panicked eyes wild, hooves striking the walls. She grabbed the nearest halter, coughing, dragging a mare toward the door. The animal reared, terrified, nearly knocked her down. Easy, girl, Mattie shouted, voice hoarse. Easy now. Her arms burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't stop. One by one, she drove them out into the open field, slapping their flanks until they bolted clear of the flames. Caleb met her halfway, with buckets of water, his face black with soot. They worked without words. Two silhouettes in the firelight, moving with desperate rhythm. Throw, run, refill, throw again. The blaze roared, greedy and relentless. Sparks leapt into the night like angry stars. When the roof began to sag, Caleb shouted, "Get back!" But Mattie was already at the last stall. Inside, a calf bleated in panic. "Mattie," he yelled. She disappeared into the smoke. Seconds stretched like hours until she stumbled out again, coughing, arms wrapped around the squirming calf. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, gasping, the animal still alive, in her lap. Then a sound like the sky breaking. The roof collapsed inward, sparks erupting in a burst of red and gold. And just like that, the barn was gone. Dawn found them sitting in the ashes. The smoke had died, but the smell clung to everything: hair, clothes, skin. Caleb sat beside her, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the blackened timbers. Mattie's hands were blistered. Soot streaked her face in crooked lines. She looked at what was left, the charred remains of months of work, and felt something twist inside her. Her voice came out small, barely a whisper. Maybe he's right. Caleb turned. Who, Whitlock? Maybe strong women just invite trouble. She stared at her hands. Everywhere I go, something burns. Maybe I bring it with me. The words hung in the smoky air, brittle and sharp. Caleb looked at her a long time before answering. Then he said softly, "You didn't bring the fire, Mattie?" She shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through the soot. Then, why is it always me, fightin' it? He reached over, taking her hand not to comfort, but to ground her. Because you're the only one who doesn't run when it starts. The simplicity of it hit her harder than any sermon could have. She closed her eyes, a tear falling onto his wrist. They sat like that for a long time, two figures against a horizon smeared gray with ash, waiting for the world to remember what peace felt like. When the sun rose, they started again. No speeches, no promises, just work. Mattie fetched the hammer, Caleb the nails. Together they dragged the first beam upright, shaky, uneven, but standing. The rhythm came back, slow. Hammer strike, breath. Hammer strike. The sound echoed across the field, steady as a pulse. By mid-morning, the sweat on their faces had mixed with soot, forming dark streaks like war paint. Caleb looked up at her once, smiling faintly. Barn'll be better this time. Stronger. Mattie returned the smile, tired but sure. Maybe we are too. He nodded. Yeah, maybe we are. They worked through the day, hauling, lifting, rebuilding. At one point, she tripped over a fallen plank, and he caught her elbow. Their hands brushed rough, meeting rough. Neither said a word, but both felt it that small, steady current between them. By the time the sun began to set, half the frame stood upright again, outlined against the sky like the bones of something reborn. They sat on the porch steps that night, watching the glow fade behind the mesas. The air smelled of smoke and pine resin, strange, but peaceful. Caleb broke the silence first. Used to think the worst thing a man could lose was a roof. Now I think it's the will to build again. Mattie glanced at him. Then we're richer than we look. He chuckled softly. Reckon so? She looked down at her blistered hands. You ever think about quittin', just letting it all go? He shook his head. Not since you showed up. Mattie smiled. Small but real. Guess we're both stubborn fools. Caleb tilted his head toward the half-built barn, the kind that make things last. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of horses moving in the distance. The animals they'd saved were settling, alive. Mattie watched the new frame of the barn, silhouetted in starlight. It wasn't finished far from it, but it stood, and so did she. Later that night, as she lay in bed, the scent of smoke still clinging to her hair, she thought back to the fire, to the heat, the chaos, the fear. Then to Caleb's words, "You didn't bring the fire. You fought it." Her heart slowed, her breathing steadied. Out beyond the window, the windmill turned slow, its creak blending with the rhythm of her thoughts. Maybe that's all life ever was, a series of small rebuildings, a barn, a heart, a hope. And maybe what made someone strong wasn't that they never burned. It was that they got up anyway, hands blistered, eyes open, ready to start again. Time didn't stop at Broken Mesa. It simply slowed long enough for the land to remember what hope felt like. Weeks turned to months. Then, seasons changed. The barn that had burned now stood tall again, stronger, straighter, smelling of new pine and rain. The fences were mended, the fields greened after the first fall showers. And the ranch, once quiet and forgotten, began to hum with life again. Mattie Cole worked like the land itself had put her on its payroll. Up before dawn, last light gone before she rested. Her hands healed but stayed calloused. Her shoulders carried a strength that no longer felt like a burden. She mended harnesses, trained horses, and led calves from the floodplain with a gentleness that made even the ranch hands stop and watch. Caleb said little most days, but he watched her, too, not with possession, but with gratitude, like a man watching rain return after a long drought. Word began to spread through the valley. The woman from Broken Mesa, the tall one, the one Whitlock had mocked, had rebuilt what others said was finished. Neighbors came by under pretense to borrow tools, to ask about fencing, to trade seed, but mostly, they came to see her. And for the first time in her life, Mattie didn't shrink from the eyes that looked her way. She met them steady, calm, kind. One afternoon, a wagon rolled up the path, creaking under the weight of sacks of grain. A man from Down Valley stepped off, hat in hand. "Miss Cole," he said awkwardly, "heard tell you fix that south ditch." "Ours keeps cloggin' same way. Mind if I take a look at how you done it?" Mattie nodded. "Ain't my secret. I'll show you." He hesitated. "Didn't figure you'd help after the way folks used to talk." Mattie smiled faintly. "Talk don't build nothin'. Work does." By week's end, 3 more came, then 6. Soon, Broken Mesa wasn't the quiet place it used to be. It had become a kind of school for those who wanted to remember how to build things right with patience and dignity. And somehow, they all seemed to leave standing taller than when they'd arrived. One day, near harvest time, a wagon brought a small family from the neighboring ranch. Among them was a girl no more than 13, thin but tall, awkward in her limbs, eyes downcast. While her father talked with Caleb, the girl wandered toward the corral where Mattie was shoeing a horse. The girl watched in silence for a long while, twisting her braid. Then she said softly, "Moss's folks shouldn't look a woman in the eye if she's taller than them." Mattie straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "That so?" The girl nodded, shy. "Boys at church call me Beanpole." Mattie crouched slightly, so their eyes met level. "Well, they called me Ox Woman once." The girl blinked. "What did you do?" Mattie smiled small. "Slow, but sure. Outworked every one of them." The girl grinned despite herself. "You make me feel okay being tall?" Something caught in Mattie's throat, a tenderness she didn't expect. She laid a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Good. 'Cause the world's got enough folks trying to be small." The girl's smile widened, and she ran off to tell her mother. Mattie watched her go, then turned toward the hills, heart heavier and lighter all at once. She realized, for the first time, that what she'd built here was more than fences and barns. It was permission for others to stand the way she'd learned to. Winter came quiet that year. The first snow fell slow, blanketing the corral in white and softening the scars of the old fire. Inside the barn, warmth glowed from the lanterns. The air smelled of hay, coffee, and sawdust. Caleb had been working on something for weeks, muttering and sanding in the corner, like a man possessed. Mattie had left him to it. One evening, as the snow deepened outside, he finally called to her. "Come here a minute." She wiped her hands on a rag and crossed the barn. What she saw stopped her cold. It was a chair, a heavy, hand-carved oak chair, wide through the shoulders, steady in the legs, built to fit her. The wood gleamed honey gold in the lamplight. "I noticed you never sat in that porch chair," he said quietly. "Figured maybe it didn't feel like yours." Mattie stared at it, at the craft, the care, the thought behind it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Caleb shrugged, embarrassed. "Just oak and nails." She ran her hand along the backrest, feeling the smooth grain, the strength in it. "No," she said. "It's more than that." He looked at her, not quite smiling, not quite steady. "Reckon a woman who keeps a ranch standin' ought to have a place built for her." Mattie sat down slowly. The chair didn't creak, didn't bend. It fit perfectly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire cracked in the stove. Snow tapped softly at the window panes. "Finally," Mattie said, "all my life. I thought the world just wasn't built for me." Caleb's voice was soft. "Maybe it wasn't, but you went and built your own." She smiled, then a real one, wide and unguarded. And for a moment, the silence between them felt sacred. Later that night, she took the chair out onto the porch. The wind was cold, but she didn't mind. She sat where the old, empty chair had rocked for years. Only now, beside her, there was another, 2 chairs, 2 survivors. The sky above was thick with stars. Down below, the fields shimmered silver in the moonlight. Mattie leaned back, the oak solid beneath her. She thought of all she'd lost and all she'd built again, with her own hands. And for the first time in her life, she felt not just useful, but right. like she belonged exactly where she was, in a world that had finally made room for her. The snow had just begun to melt when the past came riding up the road. Mattie saw him before she knew who he was, a lone figure hunched in the saddle, clothes torn by wind and time. The horse looked as tired as the man, ribs showing under its hide. Caleb was fixing the gate when he noticed her pause. "Someone you know?" he asked. Mattie squinted into the low winter sun. The rider was slow, hesitant. When he raised his head, something inside her went cold. It was Harvey Cole, her uncle, the man who'd sold her. He dismounted clumsily, boots slipping in the mud, and took off his hat. The hair beneath was thinner, the face lined deep with regret and liquor. "Mattie," he said, his voice cracked like old wood. "You look different." She didn't answer. Caleb stepped closer, standing just behind her shoulder, not to block, but to remind her she wasn't alone. Harvey's eyes darted from Caleb to the barn, the house, the horses grazing by the fence. "You built this?" he asked. Mattie's tone was calm, almost flat. "We did." He nodded slowly. "Heard about it. Folks say you got a good spread here. Thought maybe." He hesitated. Mattie folded her arms. "Say it plain, Uncle." He swallowed hard. "I need help. Lost everything. Cards, sickness. Don't matter how. Ain't got food nor roof. Just need a few dollars to get me to Santa Fe." The silence that followed felt heavy, almost alive. Mattie's jaw tightened. "You sold me for a card debt once. Now you want me to pay another." Harvey winced. "I was wrong, girl. I know that. Been wrong near every day since. But I'm old, and I got nothing. I'm begging you." Mattie just this once. Her name in his mouth sounded strange, like a prayer from someone who'd forgotten how to kneel. Caleb said nothing. He just watched, quiet, eyes flicking between them. This wasn't his fight. It wasn't his forgiveness to give. Mattie took a long breath, the cold air burning her lungs. She looked at the man who had once been her family, once her jailer. He looked smaller now, not in size, but in spirit. "Why come to me?" she asked finally. "There's plenty who'd take pity on a man like you." Harvey's lips trembled. "Because I knew you'd listen." That almost made her laugh, not in cruelty, but disbelief. "You think I owe you that?" He lowered his gaze. "No. But I hoped you'd remember I'm blood." Mattie's eyes hardened. "Blood don't mean much if you sell it to strangers." He flinched, shoulders curling inward. "I was drunk, stupid. Thought I'd make it right someday." She shook her head. "There ain't no right that comes from that kind of wrong." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of the barn roof in the wind. Finally, she turned toward the house. "Wait here." Inside, Mattie stood by the table, staring at the small tin box Caleb had built for their earnings. She didn't touch it. Instead, she walked to the pantry and pulled out bread, a few dried apples, and a blanket folded near the stove. When she stepped back outside, Harvey looked at the bundle in her hands with confusion. "No money," she said, handing it to him, "but you won't go hungry." He stared down at it, shame painting his face. "I can't take charity." She met his eyes, unflinching. "This ain't charity. It's mercy. And there's a difference." He swallowed hard. "You're better than me." Mattie's voice softened, though the steel never left it. "No, just different. You sold me for your comfort." She paused, letting the words hang in the cold air. "I'll feed you for your survival. That's the difference between us." Harvey blinked back tears, old man's tears. The kind that come from years of rot, trying to wash itself clean. I don't deserve it, he whispered. She nodded once. Maybe not, but I deserve to give it. So take it and go before I change my mind. He took the bundle slowly, hands shaking. Mattie, he said, voice breaking, you turned out stronger than I ever thought you'd be. She gave a small, sad smile. That's 'cause you thought wrong. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes anymore. Then he mounted his tired horse and rode off, slow and crooked, until the wind swallowed him. For a long time after he disappeared down the trail, Mattie stood there still as stone. The snow had started again, falling soft and steady, covering the prints he'd left behind. Caleb walked up beside her, quiet. You could have sent him away, he said. I did, she answered, just not hungry. He nodded. That's the kind of mercy most folks don't understand. She exhaled, long and heavy. It don't feel like mercy. Feels like memory. He looked at her profile, the way her eyes stayed on the empty road. You did right. She turned slightly. You sure? Caleb smiled faintly. Pride's easy. Forgiveness, that's hard, and you did the hard thing. Mattie looked down, the first hint of peace, loosening her shoulders. Guess that's what we're best at, doing the hard things. Reckon so, he said, voice warm. They stood there together as the snow deepened, the last trace of her uncle fading into the white horizon. Mattie finally turned toward the barn, rebuilt, alive, strong. The smoke from its chimney curled upward, a thin gray thread against the pale sky. And though she didn't say it out loud, her heart spoke it plain. The past can knock, but it don't live here anymore. The county fair came in spring, bright and loud as a brass band. Tents sprouted across the valley like flowers after rain. The air smelled of dust, roasted corn, and saddle oil. Children ran between wagons, women sold pies, and the men, as always, gathered near the pens to talk cattle and weather like they were secrets. Mattie Cole had never much cared for crowds, but this year, Caleb insisted. You've earned a day off, he said, hitching the wagon, and the fair's got the best coffee in 3 counties. She smiled, knowing it wasn't about coffee. All right, she said, but you're buying. They arrived near noon. The sun hung high, and the fair buzzed like a hive. Mattie wore her best, a blue cotton dress that brushed her boots, and a hat borrowed from a neighbor. Caleb walked beside her, quiet as ever, but with that faint pride in his eyes that made her shoulders sit a little straighter. It was the first time she'd stood among the valley folk without feeling like she had to shrink. People nodded to her now. Some even waved. The world, for once, felt wide enough until she heard the laugh, low, familiar, poisonous. She turned, and there he was, Elias Whitlock, leaning against the corral fence, cigar in hand, surrounded by his usual shadows. His suit was pressed, his boots polished, the kind of man who could rot from the inside and still look like money. Well, if it ain't the ox woman of Broken Mesa, he drawled, voice dripping honey and hate. Didn't think they'd let livestock compete in the fair. The laughter rippled outward, men chuckling, women whispering, same sound as years ago, same sting. Mattie froze. Every muscle in her body tightened. The memory of the auction, the rope, the laughter, the humiliation crashed back like a wave. Whitlock took a step closer, smirking. Tell me, Mercer, he said, turning toward Caleb, how's it feel riding with a woman who could haul your wagon better than your horses? The crowd laughed harder. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He didn't move, not yet. Mattie wanted to speak, to tell them off, but the words tangled in her throat. Her chest rose and fell, breath sharp with anger. Whitlock saw it and pressed harder, voice loud enough for all to hear. "What's the matter? Big girl, cat got your tongue, or did you sell that too?" The laughter this time cut deeper. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what she'd do. Mattie's face burned, but her eyes were calm. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just looked straight at Whitlock, silent and unbroken. And that's when Caleb moved. He stepped forward through the circle of men, slow and deliberate, until he stood between her and Whitlock. "Elias," he said evenly, "you ought to quit while you still got a tongue to chew with." The crowd went quiet, laughter dying quick. Whitlock sneered, "You gonna fight me over her?" Mercer Caleb's voice didn't rise. "No, just fix something that's long overdue." Then he turned to Mattie. And before she could blink, before anyone could breathe, he wrapped one arm around her waist, the other under her knees, and lifted her clean off the ground. Gasps broke from the crowd. Her hat fell. Her braid swung loose. And for a heartbeat, all she could hear was the sound of her own pulse. Caleb looked up at her steady. "Sure," eyes soft as morning light. "You're perfect for me. Mattie Cole," he said, "don't ever let them tell you otherwise." The world went still. No wind, no laughter. Nothing but that one sentence, hanging in the air like a prayer that had waited years to be spoken. Mattie's breath caught. Her eyes filled not with shame, but something deeper. Freedom. For the first time in her life, being seen didn't hurt. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and it rolled through the stunned silence, like thunder breaking after a long drought. Whitlock's smirk vanished. His cigar dropped into the dirt. Someone in the crowd coughed. Another cleared his throat, and then, slowly, people started to look away, embarrassed, maybe even ashamed. Caleb set her down gently, his hand lingering just long enough for her to know she wasn't alone. She looked around at all the faces, the ones who had laughed at her, years ago and now. None of them mattered anymore. Because this time, she wasn't standing on an auction block. She was standing on her own 2 feet. And beside her stood a man who didn't save her. He stood with her. Whitlock opened his mouth, but no words came. He turned on his heel, muttering something about fools and freaks, and stalked away. No one followed. Caleb brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "You all right?" Mattie smiled through tears. "Better than I ever was." He grinned, a rare, unguarded thing. "Good, 'cause I wasn't planning on doing that twice." She laughed a real rich laugh that turned heads again, but for different reasons this time. The sound was alive. A boy near the fence whispered to his mother, "She's the woman from Broken Mesa." And the mother whispered back, "She's something more than that now." The fair carried on, but the laughter didn't return. People watched Mattie differently after that, not with mockery, but quiet respect. She spent the rest of the afternoon helping children feed the ponies, smiling easily, unafraid of eyes on her anymore. Caleb stayed near, letting her be, but the space between them was different now. It hummed with understanding, with promise, with peace. When the day finally ended, and the fair lights flickered against the evening sky, Mattie turned to him and said, "You didn't have to do that." He tipped his hat, didn't do it for them, did it for you and for me. She looked at him a long moment, her smile soft. Then, I reckon it was worth it. They started back toward the wagon. The stars were just beginning to appear small, bright, unashamed of shining. And for the first time in her life, Mattie felt the same. The seasons had turned again. The air was warmer now, not the dry, brittle heat of summer, but the kind that smelled of life coming back. The grass at Broken Mesa Ranch swayed under the golden light of late afternoon, each blade catching the sun like glass. From the porch, Mattie Cole could see the whole valley, the creek winding silver through the distance, the new barn standing proud and whole, the fences straight, the fields alive. Everything they'd built stood solid now, and so did she. It had been months since the fair, months since the laughter had died, and the whispers had changed their tune. Now, when she rode into town, people didn't look away. They tipped their hats. Some said morning, Miss Cole. Some just smiled. Mattie never asked for respect. She'd simply worked long enough for it to grow like wildflowers, slow, quiet, impossible to pull up once it took root. The ranch thrived. The horses grew fat on spring grass. Caleb built a new windmill tower that creaked less than the old one, and Mattie insisted on painting it red so the sky would have something proud to look at. They worked side by side, day after day, but there was peace in the rhythm now. They didn't speak often about what had happened at the fair. They didn't have to. It had become something like the land just there, part of the foundation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mattie stood by the corral watching the horses move like shadows through gold dust. Caleb walked up behind her, his hands dusty, his hat pushed back on his head. "Creek's running strong," he said. She nodded. "Guess it knows it's got folks worth feedin' again." He smiled. "You sound proud." Mattie turned slightly, the sunlight catching her eyes. "Shouldn't I be?" He chuckled. "You earned every plank and every breath of this place." She looked out at the horizon again, voice soft. "Funny thing about buildin', you start out fixin' fences, and somewhere along the way, you end up fixin' yourself." He didn't answer, just slipped his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into it, quiet and sure. The wind brushed across the porch, tugging strands of her hair loose. For a moment, the whole world seemed to slow. Later, when dusk began to fall, Caleb went inside to light the lamps. Mattie stayed out, resting her hands on the railing, eyes following the light fading off the mesas. And then her voice came, soft and steady, like a memory carried on wind. "I used to think strength meant fightin' every hand that tried to shape me. I thought if I stayed angry enough, the world might think twice before laughing again. But it turns out, strength ain't loud. It ain't a shout. It's the steady kind, the kind that keeps you buildin' after the fire, keeps you standin' when no one claps, keeps you kind, even when you've got every reason not to be. I've learned that dignity ain't what others give you. It's what you hold on to when everything else is gone. They once called me too big, too rough, too much. But the truth is I was just enough to build a life. If there's a girl somewhere out there tall, loud, different, I hope she hears this in the wind someday. You ain't too much. You're the measure the world forgot how to take." Inside the house, the firelight flickered against the windows. Caleb called from the doorway. "You comin' in?" "In a minute," she said. He stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, and stood beside her. The two of them looked out over the valley, the fences, the barn, the distant ridges, glowing copper in the last light of day. Caleb nodded toward the horizon. "Never thought we'd come this far." Mattie smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But maybe that's the thing about roads. You don't know where they lead till you walk 'em." He reached for her hand. "You still think the world's too small for you?" She looked at him, then out at the endless stretch of land she now called home. "No," she said softly. "Turns out, it was just waiting for me to grow into it. They stood there in the golden hush, the kind of quiet that feels earned. The wind rose again, playful now, catching her braid and tossing it over her shoulder. Caleb laughed under his breath. She turned to him, smiling wide. "What's funny?" He shook his head. "Just never thought I'd see the day the wind tried to outdo you." Mattie laughed, deep and easy, the sound rolling out across the open land. As night settled, the stars began to appear, one by one, sharp and clear. The horses shifted in the distance, their breath soft in the cool air. Somewhere, an owl called low, steady, timeless. Mattie leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to, because silence, here, didn't mean emptiness anymore. It meant peace. The kind you build with your own hands. The kind that stays. Soft instrumental pause. Wind and distant horse snort Mattie's voice one last time. Quiet. Like a prayer carried by the evening breeze. They once called me too much. Turns out, I was just enough to build a life. The wind answered low, unhurried, brushing across the porch, across the ranch, across the open fields where the grass swayed gold under moonlight. Then came the sound of a horse's breath, steady, strong, alive, and the world faded to quiet, in a world that often measures worth by size, wealth, or noise. Mattie Cole reminds us of a quieter truth that dignity is not given, it's lived. Her journey from shame to peace wasn't about becoming stronger than others. It was about no longer needing their approval. Each of us carries a weight the world doesn't see, old regrets, words that still sting, dreams we buried because someone once told us we were too much or not enough. But life has a way of softening the hard edges. If we keep standing, keep building, and keep showing kindness even when it isn't returned. Mattie's story teaches that forgiveness is strength, gentleness is power, and that true beauty lives in the courage to stay kind in a cruel season. She didn't change to fit the world. She built a world that finally fit her. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're all still trying to do to become enough. Not for others, but for ourselves. Thank you for riding with us through the dust and the light of this story. If Mattie's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you that strength can be quiet and kindness can be mighty, then don't let the story end here. Hit like, share this tale with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Wild West Echoes for more stories of forgotten souls, second chances, and the kind of courage that never makes the headlines, but always changes hearts. Until next time, keep your coffee hot, your heart open, and your eyes on the horizon, because somewhere out there, another story is waiting to be found.